Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from Queens, New York, we are here for week 11 of the show. This season, we're pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an entire NFL season with an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows. Each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Analytics don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
All right, week 11. We are on the other side of the halfway point of the NFL season. Got a couple games to go through for you guys this week, a couple reactions to what we saw in week 10, and of course, taking a look at the futures market and trying to see if we can extract any value from there. Before we get into that, just remember we are throwing a live watch-along on Thursday, November 13th. This is going to be during the Thursday night football matchup between the Patriots and the Jets. We are doing a live watch-along with a raffle. You'll have a chance to win either a Garrett Wilson or Drake May jersey. We'll be raffling it off live. We'll be live betting the game, and I'll have a community parlay for everyone to root for together. I have a couple of other fun surprises planned, so make sure you guys are there on Thursday, November 13th. We are hosting this at Connect. This is a sports bar in Astoria, so if you're in the New York City area, please make sure you come out. More details will be available in the description of this podcast, as well as on my social media at thenoise.media. Make sure you guys are following on Instagram. All right, so talking about week 11, couple interesting matchups, right? The NFL goes back to Madrid. We got the Commanders and the Dolphins. This is not a game that I have a lot of interest in, despite Miami taking a bunch of money. You're seeing 2.5s become 3s, and this is where we want to start to talk about overreactions to last week, right? Where we have the Buffalo Bills kind of getting stomped on by Miami, a team that we haven't really had many high prospects for at all so far this year. So I'm surprised. I'm surprised to see Miami come out and beat the Bills. It wasn't a sweat for anybody that bet that Miami number +9. Personally, I didn't go there, but I think the Bills and perhaps the Packers as well, you're starting to see some of this kind of issue where, yes, they are really good on an EPA per play basis, right? They're generally one of the league leaders in terms of elite offenses on these quote unquote predictive metrics that we call them. But where the issue that we're running into is with the sequencing and the play call, right? On a per play basis, we probably view them, really highly, but on a sequencing basis, they're becoming far too predictable. We know the Bills want to run the ball. We know that they want to kill clock, kind of protect that defense and hide it at times. But realistically, right, they're running the ball on first down almost every time. And then on second down, you're going into a short pass where both of these situations are not leading them to that didn't lead them to success in the Miami game, right? Where you're going 1st and 10 run and, you don't really get much because everyone's expecting it. The second and long short pass, a lot of times in that Miami game ended up being incomplete if they didn't run it a second time, leaving you in a ton of 3rd and longs and nowhere to really go with the football for Josh Allen. We know that, weapons from a wide receiver perspective has not been one of the strong points for the Buffalo Bills offense. We kind of knew that going into the season, and we also knew that going into the week. So I'm not really surprised that they don't have these elite separators or guys that you can just throw the ball up to. But when you have Josh Allen, you should be a lot more aggressive throwing the ball. And there's a lot of times that we don't see that from the Buffalo Bills against inferior opponents. And you see this from the Packers as well. Not that the Eagles are an inferior opponent, right? After they lose one of the worst football games I've ever seen on Monday Night Football. But you're seeing this with these teams where they have such a commitment to running the ball when it's not working or teams are able to load the box up against them, they're really having a hard time getting to that play action, getting to that like second level that they're looking to reach. And unless they are going up against a difficult opponent, let's say, Buffalo playing up against the Chiefs, they're really falling flat. And I really worry about a team like Buffalo sometimes where they have a tendency to kind of, settle into a game too late and don't end up getting more aggressive when they need to be. And you saw that where they weren't able to come back against the Bills. We see this with the Ravens all the time. You saw this with the Commanders a little bit with Jaden Daniels. It's the model in the NFL, right? To run the ball effectively in order to generate big passing plays, in order to kill clock and control time of possession. But when that doesn't happen, these offenses tend to look really, really bad. So those are my macro thoughts for Week 11. A couple other games that I'll highlight as we go along through projecting this Week 11, I should say, and that'll lead me to my first pick. I know this kind of seems a little bit opposite of what I said, but I'm looking at Buffalo against Tampa Bay. I like Buffalo in this spot. You can get a -5 out there. There's -5.5s pretty much painted. I think Baker Mayfield's hurt. I do not think that he's healthy. He had an injury that wasn't listed on the injury report at any point, but he made comments to the media that he was nursing it during the bye week. He sustained the injury, I think, in week 8. And if I'm not mistaken, he hasn't rushed once since getting hurt. So just something to keep a lookout. This Tampa Bay offense is not the high-flying offense that you saw, a couple weeks into the season. I think they're definitely starting to regress. Some of the depth issues are finally starting to affect them, right? With no Chris Godwin yet, no Mike Evans, no Bucky Irving. They've had some big comeback wins where that really didn't matter. But now you throw in, a bit of an unhealthy Baker Mayfield. I'm a little bit concerned with this offense. Not that the Buffalo defense is really all that strong and like something that's going to be stopping them, in their tracks, but I do think Buffalo should be able to get their offense going against Tampa Bay. And what's keeping this number down is probably the fact that Buffalo hasn't gotten it going in a couple weeks. The fact that Buffalo will be running right into Tampa Bay's strength, right, which is their run defense. I think you're going to get an interesting situation where Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills or Joe Brady, they're going to need to be forced to make this a more of a passing offense, especially if Baker Mayfield ends up putting up, anywhere near 20, 27 points. The Buffalo Bills are going to be forced to throw the ball much, much more than we've seen them, and more aggressively than we've seen them against inferior opponents. Tampa Bay might be in that nice middle ground of opponent where they're good enough to scare them, and they'll make them maybe, quote unquote, take out the good plays and start using them. So I like Buffalo here. I think a 5.5 is a little bit short. I don't think the market is factoring in, the potential injury to Baker Mayfield. I think, you shouldn't have much of a weather game, although, we're seeing some snow flurries in New York, and upstate New York will probably be even a little bit colder, right? You have that kind of warm weather team moving to cold weather stadium. I don't buy into that too much, but I think that's generally taken into account in the line. But in this case, I think Buffalo just feels a little bit short to me. I'm surprised this isn't 6. I wouldn't be surprised if it closes at 6. And I really wouldn't look to buy back on Tampa Bay unless we were getting, a 6.5 or 7, which is just not going to happen. So we're going to go with the Buffalo Bills as our pick this week. Another game that I want to highlight is the Seattle Seahawks and Los Angeles Rams. This is quietly going to be the best game of the week. With the Seahawks putting a beat down on the Arizona Cardinals, right? You had 2 defensive touchdowns in the first quarter. You're really not going to be able to do much against that. I think it was 28-0 by the time Arizona really started to get their game going. So really, really big win for the Seahawks. You're really seeing them take advantage of a somewhat easier schedule, and they get one of their first big tests in a couple weeks up against the Rams. Obviously, this is an important game for divisional equity. This is an important game for potential NFC playoff seeding. So obviously, both these teams are going to be geared up. They've had this circled on the schedules for a while, and I gotta say, I like Seattle. I'm a little surprised to see myself saying that this far into the season, just because I think the Rams are sort of quietly a very dominant team. Not that the Seahawks haven't been dominant as well, but I think they've been getting a lot more credit, and credit deserved, for the ability that they've had. So I like this Seahawks look. I think, their offense is becoming a little bit more sustainable. We do have some concerns with wide receiver depth, right? If Cooper Kupp struggling to stay healthy, they've really, they signed Rashid Shaheed, they traded for him. They didn't really end up needing to use him against this Cardinals team. So I'm happy they made that acquisition just to give them some more bodies out there. And obviously Shaheed being, a pretty high quality player. So I'm interested to see what this offense is going to look like up against, a defense that isn't incredibly banged up like the Cardinals were. But long story short, I think 3 points is too much. I think I have this closer to a pick on a neutral. Even if I gave the Rams a full 2 points for home field, I can't get higher than, a Rams 2.5 for this game. And in this case, right, a full 3 is too much. And I'm pretty surprised they got there, especially after opening -2.5 for the Rams on Sunday night on the reopener. I'm pretty surprised that we're seeing a +3 at even money, or sorry, at -110 in market. I would expect this to be more like a juice 3, but you have plenty of -110 +3s out there. So I'll be looking at the Seattle Seahawks as a side. I'm also interested in the under here at 48.5. I think both of these teams are going to try to look to take away the explosives, right? And we've seen that, especially from the Seahawks, where their downfield passing game with JSN, especially getting Shaheed as well to help stretch the field. They are run, play action, big play. And I do think the Rams are going to be a much more disciplined defense, that they're going to have a harder time getting to that. So I don't think that this is a game where you see Seattle, score 35 points because the defense is just not prepared for, what they're bringing to the table. I do really still like the Seattle defense. I still really like the Rams offense as well, but I think we're going to get a stylistic matchup where both teams are really going to try to run the ball and try to get to that explosive play, but both defenses are going to be kind of prepared to take that on, knowing the play style of their opponent. So I'm happy to take both the Seahawks and the under here. I don't generally love to take both the side and total in any given game. I feel like it ends up, if you have a game script that you think that this is going to go by, and you're wrong, then you end up being wrong twice. So I think there's enough value in each of these plays individually to bet them. So although it's not a strategy that I usually use, I'm going with both the Seahawks +3 -110 as well as the under at 48.5. I think if this dips any further, I don't think you'll get through a key number like 47, but if for whatever reason we get this at 46.5 come Sunday, we'll try to look for some buyback on the over. All right, I know I usually save this towards the end, but we are needing to change our luck with our Sweet Gains Frozen Lock for whatever reason. Although this has been a very, very good season, the Frozen Lock has really escaped me so far this year. So I'm going to choose another game where I think we have plenty of value and is one of my favorite bets on the slate. Remember, if you want to get all of my bets in real time, please join the Discord. Link to the Discord is available in both the description of this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music, as well as through the link in my Instagram at thenoise.media. Make sure that you're in the Discord. The Discord is the only place to get all of my plays in real time as I bet them, as it hits the account. I'm sending out a message to everybody in the Discord, giving you a heads up. I track all my bets in there. I track my bets using BetStamp as well, so you know it's a verified line when you're getting it. And we're having a very, very good year. So I hope everybody can join us for the second half of the year, and we keep things going. Without further ado, here is your Sweet Gains Frozen Lock for Week 11, brought to you by Sweet Gains. Sweet Gains is a protein ice cream company providing a high-protein, low-calorie option to help you with your fitness goals. So the frozen lock this week is going to be the Green Bay Packers -7. This is a gross spot. Let's just keep it, let's say it how it is. This is a gross spot for Green Bay at the Giants, coming off of Monday Night Football and having a disgusting loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, where, this is a 0-0 score in the third quarter, ends up being 10-3 Eagles. Really, really nasty game. I'd love to sit here and say that, this is the result of two great defenses going head to head against each other and, really holding the other team down, which, to an extent, but realistically, we're just talking about offenses that looked putrid, offenses that looked highly predictable, couldn't generate downfield passing. And I really didn't like how Jordan Love looked either. Jordan Love, we talked about last week on Week 10's episode of the show, where he's one of the league leaders in EPA generated, and EPA per dropback is great. But when you watch him play, I have no idea what goes on through his head. I don't get it. And there were multiple plays last night that I saw. I honestly happened to see a lot more of the Packers drives than the Eagles did, but multiple plays where he's struggling to keep his eyes down the field. He is breaking out too quickly because the pressure is getting to him and he's not looking up. He took a couple runs kind of just to buy himself time, but really had open receivers. He also had some unfortunate drops, right? You had some drops or kind of misplayed balls in some critical situations on third or fourth down. They're obviously struggling a little bit, missing Tucker Kraft. I'm not ready to say that a tight end is going to make or break an offense, but obviously, he's definitely affecting this offense. They were also without Matthew Golden, continue to be without Jaden Reed. Romeo Doubs gets hurt, banged up during that game. So we definitely want to monitor the status of the Packers' offensive skill players. Hopefully Dobbs will be good to go. I would hope that Golden will be back. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing a whole lot of Dontavian Wicks and Bo Melton, who they moved off of the wide receiver position, right? I actually kind of forgot about that. He's no longer a wide receiver on the team, but has been lining up at wide receiver with all the injuries. Luke Musgrave is a fine tight end, right? He's obviously not of the caliber as Tucker Kraft because Tucker Kraft kind of upseated him, or whatever the word is. He took his job that we were all expecting Luke Musgrave to be kind of this elite tight end for the Packers a couple of years ago. So he's obviously not as good as Kraft, but he is of a decent enough quality that I'm not projecting such a big drop off. I think this offense is going to end up being okay if Jordan Love can play better. And now enter the New York Football Giants. So with the Packers at -7, to me, I can't understand how this is correct. Even if Jackson Dart were to play, which I don't think he will, right? Jackson Dart goes down in Week 10 with a concussion. It was only a matter of time. I hate to say something like that, but we've been talking about Jackson Dart all season where, yes, he has flashes of really, really elite athleticism. Yes, he has great flashes of downfield passing, but man, does this guy not think when he plays. He needs to stop taking so many hits. He needs to learn to get down. He needs to learn to get rid of the ball. This is all stuff that you're going to grow. This is growing pains. This is stuff that's difficult for a young quarterback to learn, especially when you play, you play the position your whole life. You're bigger, stronger, faster than almost everybody. And it's hard to tell a guy you can't just run that guy over because he's never faced an NFL caliber DB. He's never went up against an NFL caliber edge rusher. And it's just it's a hard lesson that a lot of young quarterbacks have to learn. We saw it with Jaden Daniels. I'm not saying that caused his injury this year, but definitely a bunch of the injuries that he sustained earlier in the year and last year are a result of the play style. And Jackson Dart needs to learn how to play differently because this is going to continue to be an issue for him. It's the head this time. It's going to be the ribs next time. You don't want to wish injury on any player, but it's almost expected. I'm not sure what else to tell you. So Jackson Dart, I think, will miss. That's generally what we've seen from NFL quarterbacks so far. or players so far in this modern concussion NFL world where if this is the playoffs, it doesn't matter. Concussions don't exist in the playoffs, if you didn't know. But in the regular season, right, generally you get a concussion that pulls you out of the game, you're going to miss the next week. That's kind of how we see things going. So to me, this is a Russell Wilson line. Russell Wilson, if you haven't remembered, is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league at this point. Wilson also has no ability to evade sacks at this point. He's really, really struggling with making the right read. He's really struggling with holding the ball too long. This is why he got benched. And in the flashes that we've seen him come back in, he's looked terrible. So I'm not sure what to expect here. There is another angle, right, with Brian Daboll being fired. And I hate to say deserved, but at this point, right, you can't support Brian Daboll. I'm surprised they didn't let him finish out the year just because of all the turmoil at quarterback and stuff like that. But to me, that call that Brian Daboll made to kick a field goal from the 1 yard line was absurdly egregious. And we've talked about this time and time again on the podcast about you need to learn how to play to win. You cannot play not to lose. And kicking a field goal from the 1 yard line, almost like regardless of the game state. I mean, I feel like you could be up 3 scores and I still think that's a terrible idea. The win percentage that you gain from going for it is so much higher being able to score the touchdown. When you have 4 downs from the 1 yard line, you have like a 90% chance to score. You need to use it. Obviously, you need to, convert, and, a bad team is not going to convert that highly. I get it. The Giants are a bad team, but man, you take that chance. You need to go for it in that situation. And Greg Olsen, who is probably the only commentator worth listening to, or color commentator, I should say, worth listening to in today's NFL. That's a whole other tangent I can go off on how the commentating is just absolutely atrocious. On a Sunday, just because you have all these guys that they seem like they have no idea what they're talking about. But Greg Olsen was the one that was explaining that you actually are more likely to score if you are the team that's more likely to score even if you don't get it, right? Because of the field position game that you're playing. So if you go for it on 4th and goal from the 1 yard line and you don't make it, your other team is getting the ball at the 1. Right, I know the Bears' offense was good as a whole last game. I know that you're worried about Ben Johnson and his ability to scheme something up and XYZ. I know your secondary is really soft for the Giants, but from a pure field position game, you can't kick that. You just can't do it. And the point that Greg Olsen was making is that because they now have to have 3 or 4 downs to get out of their own red zone, or I get out of their own 10, let's just say, you as the team that misses on that fourth and goal opportunity, you're still more likely to score because they're not going to be able to flip the field. If you have to punt from inside your own 10, right, you're getting the ball as the opposing team at the 50 at the worst. So I really don't like that call. I'm not saying Brian Daboll got fired because of that call specifically, but I think that is kind of putting us in this category of there are guys that scheme pretty good offenses. There are guys that are pretty decent, people in terms of leadership for to some extent, and they really struggle with the decision making that it requires to be an NFL head coach. And I would put Brian Daboll in that category of guys that I just can't trust to make a call on 4th down. So, all that said, right, sometimes you see a spot which we could call a dead cat bounce in the NFL where that interim head coach, they get the guys juiced up, for depending on who it is, they gain some momentum perhaps for that first game back, or that first game on the other side of a head coach that was losing. You do see that as a spot that's talked about a lot in the NFL. It does come through, every so often, and that's why it's a known thing. But I just think 7 is way short Meadowlands is essentially no home field advantage. I really don't think I don't think that there's any I don't think there's any home field to be giving the Giants. And even if you assign something small like, a half a point, this is still just a wide range, right? If you're using Unpredictable, which is a website that we use that just tracks market rating. This is not what my rating necessarily is for these teams, but just using market rating, right? You have a 5.3, a 5.0 for the Green Bay Packers, and you have a -4 for the Giants. So that's a 9, right? And that's assuming that Jackson Dart is playing. So if Russell Wilson ends up going for this team, this is going to get even more out of hand. So I think at 7 flat, you have plenty of value. I understand that the Packers look terrible on Monday, and perhaps that's why some of this softer money came in early on, just betting. I almost wonder if people are setting up a head fake in the market as well. Like with the Packers reopening around 8 or 7.5 in some spots, I'm surprised that they didn't take money there, and I'm surprised to see Giants money come in early. So I'm gonna be part of the first wave against that money, where I think Green Bay's the side, right? This is again using Unpredictable. This is -9 for Green Bay on a neutral. Going into the Meadowlands is not much at all. Even if you gave them a full point, right? It's -8 for the Packers. So at -7 flat, you have plenty of value there. And again, I don't give the Meadowlands any home field. So don't be surprised if you see a Russell Wilson announcement in this game shoot out to 9.5 or 10 or something crazy like that. So I think you bet it now, you bet it early. And again, if you're in the Discord, you've already received this play. We've already got it. It's already in our account. So hopefully I didn't jinx it with my frozen lock streak, but my frozen lock for week 11 is the Green Bay Packers -7. All right, let's talk a little bit about the futures market. We'll start over in the AFC West, which is a division that we've been tracking pretty tightly. I've talked about this on the podcast before, of the Denver Broncos positions that I took that I probably sold out of a little too early, just given how these last couple of weeks have shaken out. I thought that there was going to be a little bit more volatility for the Broncos coming into the season, coming into these past few weeks, but they're leading the division kind of squarely at 8-2, right? Next would be the Chargers. Chargers are sitting at 7-3 after beating Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football, and that leaves the Chiefs at 5-4. First time, this has gotten a ton of press. First time we're seeing the Chiefs this deep into the season be outside of the playoff picture at this point. I would say there's little to no chance they miss the playoffs. The Jacksonville Jaguars have the tiebreaker against them from a head-to-head win, which is, kind of crazy, but good for our Jacksonville futures that look dead in the water. But the Chiefs are currently plus 160-ish in market to win the AFC West. And I think that's a bet that I'm going to make. I understand, right, that they're back 2 games right now from the Broncos, but they have 2 games to play against the Broncos, starting with week 11, where they are going at Denver. Interesting matchup, right, where the Broncos do, it's kind of a strength on strength situation, right? The Broncos do get a ton of pressure on the quarterback, right, where you're going to have Patrick Mahomes rushed. He's generally okay against pressure. He from an EPA perspective, he's generally good against a blitz, but the hallmark of a great defense is being able to rush 4 and still get pressure. So, you're not blitzing Mahomes, but you're going to be able to pressure him without sending the house, and that gives any quarterback fits. So, not that Mahomes isn't mobile enough to make plays out of it, but I do expect Denver's, pass rush to show up. Right, their pass defense has been very good this year, naturally with Pat Surtain. And when you have a rush defense you have a pass rush that's that good, that's going to always support your secondary, because that's less time that they need to actually cover wide receivers. But we know that Pat Surtain has been out a couple weeks. He'll be out again in week 11. So I'm thinking that the Chiefs are going to be able to scheme up some quicker plays to get some of these backup cornerbacks or Riley Moss or whomever out of position and able to be, taken advantage of by the Chiefs offense, right? They have everybody back. I know Pacheco is out, but he doesn't really make a big difference to the offense. So, between Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, freaking tight end 3, Juju Smith-Schuster, these guys are going to be able to get open. And the Chiefs are going to be able to scheme stuff that are going to be able to score on them. I've been concerned with the Chiefs' defense thus far this year, right? It's really not been so great. But Bo Nix is not a good quarterback. He's had some games where he's been able to really beat up on a bad team, or they are able to finally open up a playbook where he doesn't miss these downfield throws all the time. But I really can't rely on Bo Nix to be anything more than an average quarterback at times. So I think the Chiefs are stylistically a difficult matchup for Denver because their defense will be neutralized by probably the best offense in the league. And, you're going strength on strength, yes, but their offense is just not of the caliber of the Chiefs. And even if the Chiefs have a softer defense than we'd like, the Broncos just don't have the horses. The Broncos don't have the horses to go up against the Chiefs. So I like the Chiefs in Week 13. I'm not betting it. I don't think we need to lay 3.5 on the road. Also, historically, Chiefs going into to Denver is not a great spot. And honestly, anyone going into Denver, right, has a little bit of a difficult angle with the altitude there. But I think, anecdotally speaking, right, Mahomes going into the Broncos has not been a walk in the park for him, even when Denver hasn't had a good team. So rather than mess around with the spread, I'm just going to start buying into these futures. Right, if the Denver Broncos end up upsetting the Chiefs, I mean, the futures are basically dead anyway. So it's a must-win, quote unquote, for the Chiefs here, and I think rather than lay minus 200 or minus 3.5 with them in this week, right, we're going to start to buy some divisional equity, and if they win this game, pretty much handily, and I think they'll continue to be a favorite in every matchup down the line throughout the rest of the year, and when they play Denver again, you'll end up seeing the Chiefs in that like -6 range or so at home. So I think if you're going to buy Chiefs futures, now's the time, right? You have all this turmoil in the market where, they are so far from the 1 seed when we're used to them being competitive for the 1 seed just about every year. If you were to told me at the beginning of the year that neither the Chiefs, the Bills, or the Ravens would hold the number 1 seed in the playoffs in the AFC, I would be quite surprised. And if you told me it was going to be the Colts, Broncos, and Patriots that were competing for that 1 seed right now, I would also be very surprised and thinking that we are living in a bizarro world. But we're not. This is the reality in the NFL. The Colts are good. The Patriots are good. The Broncos are all right. And I think it's time for us to buy some Chiefs. Speaking of the Patriots as well, I think it's an interesting case where I've kind of looked for spots to fade them, and they just don't come. The Patriots are pretty good. They still rate kind of slightly above average. I still think their pass defense is very gettable. But this offense is slowly becoming matchup proof. The run defense is slowly becoming very, very good. So I'm surprised that they've won so many of these games. But then again, we had this conversation at the beginning of the year where they have such a small schedule. Your bands on how much they could win were so high, right? This could be a 10-win team, even if Drake May wasn't as good as he is. And now that you're seeing Drake May really compete for an MVP, and I think at this point he's the short shot favorite to win it. Not that I would bet that, but there's a real world where this team has 12 or 13 wins at the end of the year. I do think that'll end up in a trouncing in the first round of the playoffs just because they really haven't played anybody yet, except for, winning at Buffalo. But that being said, I don't think there's any time soon that we're going to be fading the Patriots. And Drake May is going to continue to build up a strong MVP case. The only other person that I'd like to see, I'd like to put some money behind is Pat Mahomes. Pat Mahomes at about like plus 500 in market right now. I think that's another one. If you want to bet that, you might have to start betting it now. I don't think Drake May having good games against the Jets, Bengals, and Giants are going to separate him any further from Mahomes. I think, again, you're playing into this upside of the Chiefs are coming off the bye. The Chiefs are going to be geared up and ready to go, and the Chiefs are kind of going to need to run the table. This is what we're buying into with the divisional futures, and this is what I would buy into from an MVP perspective. The real turning point, right, will be when the Patriots play the Bills and then immediately at the Ravens. If you project the Patriots to lose both those games, which I would, right, I think that's where Drake May kind of loses this MVP race. And again, if the Patriots are the best team ever and they run right through the Bills and the Ravens, then so be it. We lose those wagers. I've said it time and time again on this podcast. I think Drake May is great. I think he's elite. I think he's a top 10 talent right now. And yeah, he's very deserving of being top 3 in the MVP race. I just think it's a very, very uphill battle for him to win it. It likely requires the Patriots to win the 1 seed, which, is not impossible. But this is the point in the season where I'd like to kind of buy some Chiefs positions and try to see if we can play off of that. It's like the nothing ever happens meme a little bit where the Chiefs are kind of inevitable. If this is the first year that they're not, well, we'll kind of we'll take that on the chin. But for now, I think I'll be buying into both the Chiefs on the division at plus 160, plus 170-ish, as well as some Pat Mahomes MVP around plus 500. So that's going to just about do it for this week's episode of the podcast. I'll leave you with a few Survivor notes, even though I am out, so I don't talk about it as much. But I think the Patriots against the Jets are obviously a great spot. I don't like to use Thursday Night Football as a spot for Survivor, but I just don't see a world where the Jets are going to be competitive in that game. I also like Houston at the Titans. If you haven't used Houston already, it doesn't really matter if Davis Mills or CJ Stroud goes. I think this is a horrific Titans team and is probably the worst team in the league, despite being in the same league as the Jets or the Browns. So that being said, we'll close this one out right here. Remember, we are throwing a live watch along at Connect in Astoria on Thursday, November 13th. Make sure you're there. This is the Thursday Night Football matchup between the Patriots and the Jets. I am raffling off either a Garrett Wilson or Drake May jersey. We'll be live betting the game with a community parlay for everybody to tail. And there are a couple other fun surprises that I don't want to release yet. So make sure you're there on November 13th at Connect Astoria. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And remember to like, rate, and download if you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to The Noise Media, as well as like and comment on this podcast. And if you're not already following, please make sure you follow us on Instagram at thenoise.media. That's going to do it for the Week 11 episode of The Noise Podcast. This is Max Gilson. Godspeed.